It's close to midnight and something evil is lurking in the dark. Welcome to this extra special episode of the Bionicle Inspiration series where we begin our BioCup coverage for 2019. This episode, we're going to be talking about the preliminaries round of the BioCup. We're going to go into detail about some ideas that you can get for that round. You might be thinking, I would love to enter, but I don't know quite what to build yet. Well, this video is here to help you with that exact problem. So the preliminaries round is all about building your biggest fear, but not necessarily just your biggest fear, just build something that's scary or horror based, etc, etc. So there's a little bit of wiggle room here. You're able to build the thing that you fear the most, or just build something that has sort of little scary notions related to it in some fashion. So we're going to talk a little bit about MOCs that cover all the different aspects of that, as well as throw a few concepts, ideas, and things around to hopefully inspire you a little bit so that you can join in on the fun for BioCup 2019. Let us begin. The first MOC is by Leonid Ahn and is called Makroto. So there's a lot of little things going on here that really create that sort of more sinister, evil vibe going on this MOC, which I think would perfectly fit into this preliminary round. So he's got these horns coming out of the top of his head. Of course, devils have horns, scary things have horns. It's very fitting. But I really like the way that they have been attached on this MOC. The Kraken mask that he's using here has little gaps on the side of it where the eyes are if you flip the mask the other way around, since it sort of has the two faces on that mask. And he's sort of shoved the horns in through them, so he's kind of created his own little connection point there on the mask, which is really cool, and it helps the mask look a little bit more interesting and different. And on that as well, using that Kraken mask, of course that is Makuta Pterodax's mask, by all means, use the masks that come on bad guy characters, because they already look pretty evil. They're designed to be looking that way. So take a look at some of those more evil bad guy masks, whether they're Makuta bad guys or Hero Factory bad guys or whatever. Grab them and put them on the mark and just sort of see how they look, because chances are they're going to fit really well. I also really like the skull weapon here, kind of using that white Rakshi head to kind of resemble some sort of animal skull or something, and he shoved it on the side of his weapon there, like a badass evil dude probably would. And I also like the digigrade leg design that he's got here. Very much resembles sort of devil legs in some depictions of the devil, and it helps to add to that kind of evil demon look that this MOC has. And on that, I was talking about how this kind of resembles aspects of how the devil is portrayed in certain artworks. That's certainly something to keep in mind, is to just go online, Google some things, whether that's Google demons or the devil or monsters or whatever, just sort of see what comes up, and whether it's Lego related or not, just sort of see how those characters are being designed. Or take a look at some movies or video games. There might be some sort of evil characters that you can get inspired from, and whether that's simply down to the fact of like, oh, this guy's got like a tentacle arm, that's a cool idea, I'm going to put that on my MOC. Or, oh, this guy's got a bunch of horns, I could do something similar to that on my MOC. Little things like that. Definitely do as much research as you can and get a lot of thoughts into your head, and then that way all the inspiration will just flow out of you, and all your creativity will flow out of you, and you'll have a MOC ready, and basically it'll build itself. Also really like the ribcage design on this MOC, using a bunch of those minifigure hands there to kind of form this sort of slight bony ribcage there. Looks very sort of evil and sinister. And I also like the really black and red color scheme, using very darker colors accented by that red there, which can sort of symbolize rage or anger, very, evil, demon-like. Or, of course, the colors of hell, fire and death and all sorts of stuff like that. Those colors are very, very fitting for a demon MOC such as this. So definitely a lot of thought that's gone into it, and you can notice a few little bits of inspiration that I'm sure Leonid Ahn has factored in when building this. Very, very cool. Let's now take a look at our next MOC, which is by Tony A, and is called Deep Sea Serpent. So this MOC uses a lot of the glow-in-the-dark pieces, and if we're aiming for a scary look and you switch off the lights and that thing is still glowing, well, that's pretty scary. So if you've got any of those glow-in-the-dark pieces, might be something to consider using, because they fit very well for this theme as a whole. Also, of course, snakes are pretty spooky. People have a fear of snakes, so that's definitely something that you could build quite easily. Build a snake, build a spider, that sort of stuff. But one of my favorite things about this MOC is the introduction of the tongue kind of hanging out the side of the jaw here. Of course, that jaw already looks very menacing, but the inclusion of that tongue I think actually does a lot. Simply done using some of the Exoforce bad guy robot arms there, and then illegally connecting them together so that it sort of forms this shape of a tongue. And sort of the inclusion of sort of the more out there kind of body parts like a big old slobbery tongue, or sort of some of the more grosser elements like teeth or even like fingernails or toenails, or kind of more abject stuff like that. That sort of stuff can really make a mock pop, really help it to look more sinister, evil, really gross, and kind of actually produce some kind of effect on the person looking at it, because it is naturally a little bit more repulsive and scary and out there and horrific and stuff. Now, I just said the word abject there. I'm going to touch upon two concepts that are typically used in art, specifically photography as a whole, because researching some of these concepts in a little bit more detail, as well as looking into them for inspiration, whether that's just through sort of images or movies that relate to those concepts, might actually help you get inspired a little bit. Now, I was talking a bit before about how research can be really helpful when you're trying to generate ideas. So I'm going to touch upon some of these concepts because I think they're actually very, very relevant for building mocks in this theme and taking it to a very much, really expanding upon it, really taking it that next step. I think if you sort of really engage in this, you'll definitely produce some really, really nice results. So there's two concepts in photography or art. One is the uncanny and one is the abject. So I'm going to talk about the uncanny at first off here. So the uncanny is a sort of psychological experience of something that seems kind of strangely familiar, but also seems rather mysterious and new at the same time. It's the familiar as well as the unfamiliar all in the same thing. So it may describe maybe like an incident or a familiar thing, or you might just kind of walk up to something and it just has this eerie feeling, or sort of feels a little unsettling, or something about it's a little taboo or different. You know, I'm sure you felt it in your life at some point. Certain things in media that are very much uncanny is the movie The Shining. A typical aspect of the uncanny is seeing doppelgangers, so it's sort of like twins or two of the same kind of thing, much like the two scary little girls in The Shining there. They're very much doppelgangers of each other, and it's the thing that the two of them look very similar, but they are slightly different, but they're identical twins. They kind of look the same, so there's this unsettling nature to it. So definitely, if you're building a mock, I would suggest putting like a doppelganger or a double in it, because there is that element of it being the same but different and similar, but there's something just a little eerie or off about it. Another thing that is uncanny, which is a little bit more modern, is Twin Peaks. David Lynch stuff is very uncanny and very fitting here. So it's very much something that you could explore, is the uncanny, because of course the Shining is an old horror movie, and horror is essentially what this whole thing is about. So very much kind of do a bit of research on the uncanny, or look at some uncanny art and stuff. There's some very, very nice stuff here that I think could very much relate to what you're building here. And heck, it's a free excuse to watch some cool horror movies, see what stuff comes up. The other concept is the abject. Now the abject is a little like, it's kind of a bit more in depth. It's a little bit, it took me a bit to understand it, because it's not just one thing, it is sort of a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'll do my best to explain this one. So the uncanny can kind of be multiple things. The first thing that it can be is art that very much instantly tries to repulse you. Before I was talking about the tongue being a little bit abject in the fact that it's sort of body parts. It's, like blood or pus or fingernails or toenails, or the kind of gross stuff that you initially, as soon as you hear it or you think about it, you're like, "Ugh." It's the gross stuff. They specifically put that in the art to repulse you, to elicit some sort of gross reaction. So if you can find a way of sort of implementing that into a mock, obviously with Lego, don't actually like sneeze on it or something. But if you can put that on a mock and simulate it with, like trans-colored pieces or stuff like that, get creative with it, see what you can come up with, could be really fitting and kind of create that sort of initial abject kind of gross look to it. I'm not going to include any abject images. I would have been including some uncanny stuff. That's because I don't know how how PG a lot of abject stuff is. So if you are going to look up some of that, be prepared to be grossed out, because some of it's a little bit full on. So there's your little PG-13 warning there. But yeah, abject stuff is extremely bad, unpleasant, or kind of a degrading experience. It makes you think of sort of embarrassment of body, or sort of the realistic reality of the human body or of life. It's abject for someone to be like, yeah, I sat on my butt all day and just ate pizza in my underwear and watched movies. You don't like to admit that to strangers, or you kind of like to kind of cover that aspect up of your life. So sort of showing that is a little bit more abject, a little bit more out there, a little bit gross and sort of quote unquote horrific. Which actually could be a really fitting mock. You sitting in your underwear, eating pizza, watching TV. And it could be, if you really want to relate it back to it, could be the fear of wasting your life. That's a fear, that's a horror, to some degree. So you could actually fit that in. It's a little bit more of an out there mock, but it's really stretching the theme. And that's certainly something the judges are looking for. But yes, the abject is sort of stuff that tends to, or is aiming to repulse or challenge you in really kind of confronting ways. Do a bit more research on it, see what you can come up with, and see if that helps you with your mock in some fashion. But now, back to the Lego mocks, because I'm sure that's what you want to see. Let's move on to the next mock here, which is by Moko, and is called Spider. So I love the look of this little cute goth girl here, the way the little sleeves are done there, using some of those cone pieces and things. Kind of looks like she's got very long sleeves on, and she's sort of got her hands sort of tucked into it to some degree. It's a very, very clever looking design, very fitting, very, very sweet. But to some degree, there's the uncanny stuff we were talking about before. There's a little bit of that in her. You kind of look at her, and yeah, she is just this cute little goth girl, but she's unsuspecting. You know, she seems sort of a little bit innocent to some degree, and so you go like, whoa, maybe there is a little bit something sort of a bit eerie or out there about this, and we'll get to what that is in a hot minute. But also just that, of course, you know, like punk and emo culture and stuff like that. To some degree, that does sort of fit in decently well with sort of horror and sort of more darker things. It's a little less like fear-based and more just sort of, appreciation of demons and the darker stuff. So actually that could fit rather well. If you don't want to go sort of full on into that sort of horror thing, this could be one way of approaching it that's a little bit more sort of happy to some degree. But the thing I was talking about before, she has a big old spider friend here that actually attaches to her back, or she can ride, and it's a really kind of funny, interesting concept that I quite like. And, you know, like I was saying before, it's like the uncanny in terms of, she seems like this innocent person. Oh God, she's got a big spider coming out of her back. Terrifying, but super cool. And I like that idea. You build a sort of more unsuspecting character, but they have, a demon possessing them, and suddenly, big old mechanical arms or demon arms come out of their back, and it's a cool idea. And also, of course, this spider is very fitting for this horror, scary, fear-based theme, using all these skeletal CCBS pieces here to kind of mimic the look of spider legs, all these blades on its on the tips of its legs. Very scary. Multiple eyes. Lots of eyes is always kind of creepy. And spiders themselves are kind of creepy. And heck, that's something to think about too. Spiders, they're a pretty common phobia. People are afraid of them. Fear, phobias, that's literally what this is all about. So maybe that's something to look into. And you know what? Let's do it right now. So, here's a list of phobias. Maybe some of these could spark your interest. And you go, oh, actually, I could build a mock of that. So, of course, we have spiders. That's one fear. Or snakes. We saw snakes before in the mock by Lord Oblivion there. So, fear of snakes, fear of spiders. Fear of public speaking. Perhaps you could do somebody terrified of public speaking as your mock. Again, a little bit different. Everyone else is probably building spiders. But hey, if everybody's zigging, then you should zag. Maybe you want to be the guy that makes a really out there, different build of someone doing public speaking. Fear of heights. A little bit, one that's a little bit out there as well. Bugs or insects. Slightly different to the spiders there. Fear of drowning. Fear of blood or needles. Maybe you could build a big old needle mock. Claustrophobia, the fear of small spaces. Maybe build something relating to that somehow. Fear of flying. Fear of strangers, good old xenophobia. Fear of zombies, maybe you could build a cool zombie mock. Fear the Walking Dead, all that sort of stuff. Fear of darkness, you could build a sort of evil shadow guy or something like that. And let's just quickfire a bunch of other phobias here. We've got crowded spaces, dogs, lightning, small spaces, germs, flying, holes, cancer, death, public speaking, being alone, failure, crowds, intimacy, needles, people, water, abandonment, commitment, fear of long words, fear of the unknown, driving, falling, fear of success, fear of God, fear of cats, fear of change, fear of balloons, fear of darkness, fear of men, or the fear of fears. And maybe right now you're freaking out because you got a fear of fears. I don't know, all sorts of different stuff. Just Google a list of phobias. That's literally what I was just reading off of. Maybe one of those grabs you and you're like, hey, I could easily build a fear of the number 13. Why not? The possibilities are endless. This is a very open-ended theme, and that's the point. It's meant to allow you to have a lot of freedom to move around in, and you can do completely out there and different stuff. And remember, that's what the judges are looking for. Sure, it's one thing to build a really awesome, cool spider that's a little bit scary or out there, but heck, if you can build a mock that perfectly fits something weird like the fear of ducks, make it work, make it happen. And then good old Mitch Henry and the rest of the judges, they'll be like, oh, girl, that's pretty good. And you'll advance to the next round. So there you go. There you go. Let's take a look at the next mock by Ao Okononen and is called Abzumo. This is a cool kind of evil-looking, scary-looking fly guy here. Really like all his scary teeth there. Kind of paying attention to some scarier sort of teeth designs would be very fitting for this theme, of course. Wings, of course, are another thing that's very fitting and perfect for this. That kind of evil demon look here. And also I really like the choice of colours here as well, using these blacks, purples, and dark blues, kind of paying attention to a lot of the darker colours, because if you're aiming for something that's a little bit more scary, evil, or sinister, picking some darker colour schemes would be fitting, Having an evil, sinister mock that uses, like pinks and blues and happy colours would maybe not fit so well Or it could actually fit really well. Maybe it's like those, a creepy girl who's super innocent and she's got, like a candy cane and she's dressed in a pink dress and you're like, totally unsuspecting. And then suddenly she's possessed by a demon and you're like, oh, geez, that was terrifying. So maybe that is actually the perfect color scheme you want. Just depends on what you're doing. Yeah, this is a really seriously awesome mock by A.O. Okanonen using some more kind of prefab pieces here, but achieving a really awesome look to it. A little bit more sort of skinny and kind of lanky to some degree here, but actually very fitting for the kind of flying demon look that he's got going on here. A very nice look. Really like the head design there, using that Kina fin to kind of form the general sort of shape and horns on the back of it there. Very, very cool. So nice work, my good man. Let's move on to the next mock, which is by Joxon, one of the judges for the BioCup this year, and is called Abyssal Cray Worm. So I specifically wanted to put a mock in that one of the judges made, because bear that in mind, what the judges are voting on is stuff that they like, remember? They're going to be a little bit more swayed if they have a bit more of a liking for the stuff that you're building. So obviously Joxon in the past has built himself a bug. Maybe he wants to see some more bugs. You never know. There is, of course, the Meet the Judges section on the Flickr page, so check that out, because they might leave a few hints as to some stuff that they want to see. And heck, if you can appeal to something that the judges like, well then you're more than likely to get into the next round there. Anyway, let's talk a bit about this mock. Bugs, terrifying. We were talking about that before, one of the things, a list of phobias. And heck, some bugs can be freaking weird, crazy, and look all sorts of messed up and interesting and horrific and scary. Perfect for what we're doing. I love the kind of gross eyes that he's got here. Very cool, kind of getting that pupil look to them. And then using all these different trans pieces in here as well, kind of giving it this interesting luminous effect and kind of having that interesting kind of texture and sheen that certain bugs do actually have. It's very, very nicely done. So definitely kind of gravitate towards some of those pieces there if you are aiming to build the bug. And also really cool to see a bunch of these teeth pieces and, little sort of hinge pieces and stuff to kind of form the legs, as well as those Exoforce bad guy robot arms. Those are always great pieces. And then some of these tail pieces as well to kind of form interesting shapes of like antenna and things like that. Really, really nice. But definitely one of my favorite things here is the little egg sac at the bottom there. That is creepy and terrifying and gross. Very abject, like we were talking about before. And very fitting for this horror theme, because those eggs are going to hatch and a whole bunch of baby ones of this are going to come storming out. It's terrifying, man. It's like when you try to kill the spider and then suddenly there were baby spiders on its back and you've made that problem way worse. This is kind of that. Maybe that's the mock you could build. You could build Big Mama Spider and all her little babies. Man, that'd be terrifying. Do it. Make it happen. But yeah, really gross, horrific, terrifying little bug that Joxon has built here. Perfect for the theme and very nicely done. Let's move on to another mock, which is by Jafer. And this is Huntsman, Plague Mech Pie. Plague Mech Pie. Or P. Plague Mech P. Plague Mech's got a P. One of my favorite things about this photo is the photography behind it. Simply adding that little highlight of red there onto the backdrop that's sort of casting a little bit of red on the mock there too. It's actually doing quite a lot for this mock here. It makes it look like it has a little bit of red in the color scheme, even though the color scheme is literally just black and gunmetal. And also just the red highlight on the back there actually helps sort of communicate a bit of personality behind the mock. Gives it this sort of slightly evil, scary look to it. It's really cool, and it's really smart to do that as well. Really pay attention to the lighting that you're using in the photography that you're taking of your mocks. Of course, make sure it's well lit and that you're actually showcasing the mock well. Like, sure, it's one thing to do, take your mock in a very dark location so that it looks sort of sinister and silhouetted and scary, but you got to make sure that the judges can actually, in fact, see your mock as well. But if you can do something like this, like Jafer's done here, where you can very clearly see the mock, but got a little highlight of red behind it as well, then that is very good, because, yeah, like I said, it's communicating mood and atmosphere. It's making it seem eerie and creepy. It's a really nice addition. I love the tiny little eyes here, using minifigure hands and sort of putting them into the gaps on that old Hero Factory piece there. Those little itty-bitty tiny eyes like that, they're creepy, they're unhinging, they're a bit weird, and I love it. It's very fitting for this theme of the preliminary round here. Also love how he's used more minifigure hands here on all the different multiple fingers that he's got there. Kind of just, using those Exoforce bad guy finger parts there, and then adding the minifigure hat onto it. Gives it this just sort of, they're like kind of slightly longer and a bit more protruding and kind of gross. It kind of looks like it might, I don't know what it is. There's something a little bit more kind of unhinging about it, a little bit more kind of creepy to it. It's a very nice little finger design that he's done there and very fitting for the mock. And of course, the fact that he has forearms as well even more kind of creepy and unhinging and horrific and scary, you know. If in any way you can make your kind of demon monster guy look less human, but also still slightly human to some degree, kind of like this mock here, you're definitely in the go zone there, because that's more or less what monsters and demons and evil things are, is they have that sort of slight little unhinging, unhuman aspect to them. I think this mock does that well. And of course, that's another thing too, this mock is very bug-like because it is based off a huntsman's spider. Trust me, I know, I'm from Australia. As is Jafer, for that matter. I love that was my Australian accent. It's not, but here it is. I'm speaking it right now. It's my Australian accent. But anyway, doing that, making something look a little bit more bug-like, or kind of basing it off something from the real world that is a little bit kind of creepy or scary. You know, like a spider, like a snake, like a bug, all that sort of stuff. Cool to look up a bit of inspiration for that and apply it to your mock in some fashion. Or maybe like a scary fish, like an anglerfish or something. Could be something else to consider. Or a shark, who knows? Sharks are scary. Big fear of sharks here in Australia. There is indeed. Very nice mock by Jafer. Let's move on to the final mock in this episode, which is a mock by Shiel and is called Monster. So of course there are rules in the BioCup about not using too much system, and I think this mock probably does use a little too much system, so it probably wouldn't qualify, but there's a concept that I wanted to explore in this mock. So one of the cool things about this is the fact that it looks like it's a giant cabinet and a little monster peeking out through it. But if you think about it, he hasn't built the whole cabinet and he hasn't built the whole monster. He's just framed the photograph in a certain fashion that it looks like he's built the whole thing, when in reality, not all of it has actually been finished and built. And that's something you could do as well. You know, maybe you want to build just sort of one certain aspect or thing about a mock. And so you get your camera out and you kind of figure out the rough spacing that you're going to do, and you build just a certain part of that. So you don't have to worry about building this colossal, massive thing. No, instead, like this mock here, you just sort of build the bits that you could see of the front doors of the cabinet, the top of it, and then you just build the head and the arm, and then you cloud the rest in shadow, and then you don't need to see all the other bits that you didn't even build, but the concept is still explored and explained very nicely. So, you know, maybe 2 weeks is a little bit of a rush for you in terms of building. Maybe you feel like you need a bit more. Or you can always cheat in certain ways. You know, whether it's you add a cloak on top of the mock so you don't have to worry about what's under it. Or you do a little bit like this and you kind of build more of a scene than an actual set mock. And that way you can kind of play around with how exactly you are setting it up and staging it so that you don't have to build, you know, this massive colossal thing. You can instead just build the bits that matter and the bits that you can actually see. This is something to think about. So that's it for all of our spooky, scary skeletons and other awesome horror-themed mocks based on fear and everything fitting for this round of the BioCup preliminaries. Of course, the BioCup coverage will continue soon. Hopefully, you're going to be joining in on this round and joining in on the fun. Remember, it's not about winning, it's about having fun. Of course, our regular scheduled Bionicle Inspiration Series episodes will be out on Saturday, so stay tuned for that if you're keen. If not, hey, this is basically another episode of Biss, so get excited, you're basically getting another one soon. Probably the next BioCup coverage video that'll be coming on out will be showcasing some of the mocks that have actually been entered for this round of the contest. So, by all means, submit your mocks away and put them into the contest, and then I'll pick out some of the ones that I like and I'll put them in the episode. But by all means too, take your time on the mocks, you know, there's no need to rush out an entry soon, you know, if not a lot of people enter, then I'll just do the episode a little bit later, there's no rush for that. And also that too, rather maximize all of your build time, get it all done, really think about it, really stew on it, make sure you've got the best possible mock you can, and submit it as close to the deadline as you can, but not too late. Make sure to not, miss the deadline there, but get it as close as you can, so that way you get the best thing you could possibly do. You know, ask for some feedback on it from some people. Heck, email it to the bissubmission and ask me for some feedback. I'll happily give it. I'm not a judge of this contest. I'm only covering it. I'm not actually that associated with it. I kind of am. Like, I talk to the judges and stuff, but I have no input on who wins. So I can freely give you feedback, whereas the judges cannot. So by all means, send me some stuff to the bissubmission email that you're currently seeing on your screen, and if you specifically want me to give feedback, make sure to put that into the email so that I can. Otherwise, I will just assume that it is a submission to the Whip Workshop or the Bionicle Inspiration Series. And let me know if you want to see a Whip Workshop based off of BioCup whips, if that's something you're interested in. Maybe I could do that too. Anyway, that's it for this special Bionicle Inspiration Series episode on the BioCup preliminaries. See you in the next one. Bye for now.